With the roles reversed, Sam takes the mic and turns a spotlight on me. What follows is less of an interview and more of a reveal of values, upbringing, and motivations that drive a professor of design to engage so deeply with energy, equity, and a system that shapes our future. In a world that often spotlights founders and futurists, this moment reminds us that people shaping tomorrow also teach today. Is there anything else you'd like to ask me before we wrap up, or any questions you'd like to?
Tell me about you, mate. Tell me about your family.
So my family actually immigrated to the United States in the 70s, so I'm first generation over here. We came with a real hard-working mentality, grew up in a family doing construction and cement work and all that.
Where from?
We're from a very, very small town called Arpino, just in between Florence and Rome. It's in the Lazio area. It is a World Heritage Site. It was one of the 6 cities that founded the building of Rome. If you're into truth and law, Cicero, that's the hometown of Cicero.
It's a very small town.
It is, yeah.
Cicero, oh, right. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I rode my bike near there. I rode across Italy. And that's why I was trying to figure out where you were, because I thought it's sort of southern, what do you call it? Southern, mid to southern Italy? Sort of southern Italy.
If you draw a circle around Italy, I think we're just a little south of the dead center point.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I rode near that. I don't know if I rode through that town, but I rode through so many little Italian towns and I loved it. It was just awesome.
In this stretch, I open up not just about being a professor, but a person shaped by culture, history, and geography. The lens shifts from big system to personal memories, what it means growing up around different notions of old, how place and identity influence values, and how cultural nuances drives design instinct. It's a reminder that great design doesn't begin on a screen or in a sketchbook. It begins with a perspective and the courage to hold your story next to someone else. It's a beautiful place. It's funny when people talk old here in the United States, or like it's 100 or 200 years old. I'm like, my aunt's house is in the new section of town and it's like 1,400 years old. And I'm like, and it's in the new section, right? And you're just like, what? And the impact of that architecture and design on people's thinking, like even when they build their houses to today, they're like, hey, yeah, that's a 1,000-year-old house. They'll take time to create structures that last. Whereas here, you know, we're sticks and asphalt shingles and a good wind blows it all down. And what's the value to society in creating home and housing that does that versus one that is, you know, essentially timeless?
Oh, man, and I 100% agree with that. So often you see houses and structures designed, especially modern ones in Australia and in other countries, but I see them a lot here in Australia. And I think, what is that ugly monstrosity? Looks plastic. There's 6 different colors on that design. And you go to Italy and these towns look incredible. They don't have to have that. And like you said, the buildings have been there for 1,000 years, kind of proving what works.
And you know, because people were building, you know, structures out of the materials that they have. The area that we're from, the stone structures are conglomerate rock, and we get a lot of earthquakes. And those conglomerate rocks actually help in kind of breaking up that kind of earthquakey pattern. That's why a lot of those homes are still standing. Not only the rocks that they were made out of, but the variation in block size and design. These people, like, they knew what they were doing, right?
Yeah.
This next exchange picks up speed, blending warmth and wit with unfiltered look at culture, class, and identity. I speak about the subtle pressures and assumptions that come with being perceived as an outsider. What's clear is that design for me has always been more than form. It's about navigating space, belonging, and power. This is what it sounds like when design comes from lived experience, not just learned theory.
So did you, when you came here, how old were you?
I was born here. So my parents immigrated over here, and then I was born over here. So I grew up in the United States, but you know, a good chunk of I grew up outside of Detroit. So I'm very much a car guy. Motor City, car culture it's everywhere here. I didn't even realize you couldn't drive a GM, Ford, or Chrysler until I was like, you know, halfway through like middle school. I'm like, oh, what's that? They're like, it's a Toyota. I'm like, where are those from? Because everything was the big 3. And like, I don't know if you ever heard of like the Woodward Dream Cruise, where everyone brings all these classic vehicles down. up and down the street, people just have classic cars. It is car culture is just part of what we live and breathe here. So when I speak EVs or I tell them I'm excited about, hyper efficient solar vehicles, they look at me like I've got a third head growing out of my neck. But it's something that I got to get them used to,
Yeah.
In this moment, I offer a quiet but powerful truth that empathy is not just a tool for design, it's a foundation for teaching. By sharing my own struggles with learning, I have shaped my ability to guide others. I make a case for the kind of educator who sees students not as a blank slate, but as a layered experience. It's a moment of humility that redefines expertise, not as knowing all the answers, but remembering what it feels like not to.
So what was your first way of getting into, did you study design at college or university? Yeah.
So I have an incredibly non-traditional educational path. I was originally in engineering, and then I ended up switching to design. But in between engineering and design, because I got to college when I was 17, I ended up getting an internship, and they said they would pay for any class that I wanted to take as long as I got a C, which was, great for me. So I would work a full-time job during the day and go to college at night. And when I finished with my first bachelor's degree, I had accumulated something like 304 credit hours. So I just studied everything that I wanted to know.
With no cost.
That's what happens when you give me a no-cost solution, right? I'm like, tell me more, right?
Yeah.
And then as a designer, I've got this really broad range of knowledge kind of in my brain, and it allows me to be very, very effective. One of my big personal challenges is I wasn't diagnosed until I was 23. Dyslexic, partially dysgraphic. Like reading and writing is an exceptionally huge challenge for me. Filling in bubble tests in a row, incredibly a huge challenging for me. So bad that when I got to college and I hand wrote my entrance exam, I tested into English for non-native speakers. And when the teacher read, we went around the room, she's like, okay, everybody introduce yourself. And she got to me and she's like, and what's your name? I'm like, my name's Anthony. And she's like, and how long have you been speaking English? I'm like, my entire life. And she's like, and why are you in this class? And I'm like, because they said I had to take it. And she's like, let me go pull your handwritten, because at the time it was a handwritten essay, right? And she's like, can you read this to me? And I read it normal. She goes, why does it look like it's written by several different people? And I'm like, well, when my brain starts to crash, I have to change my font so I can remember how to draw the words, because I don't come from a place where I actually spell, I draw words. So I have to operate differently. There wasn't spell check or anything like that I could use, right? You just kind of had to push through. I've used a lot of brute force to get myself to where I've gotten. In this section, I zoom out to reflect on legacy, not as a fixed destination, but as a slow accumulation of impact over time. I speak about the role of education, not just in shaping skill, but in shaping character. What emerges is a picture of teaching as stewardship, of guiding students through complexity with both urgency and care. It's not about celebrating a resume. It's about honoring the kind of presence that builds up others without needing to be seen. But that also, I'm okay with changing. I'm okay with learning. I'm okay with creating different pathways to get there, because I can't wait for the world to conform to the way that I understand and learn. So I'm going to be dynamic. And so it has made me a good designer. I will say I am a better teacher than I am a designer, because I can empathize with understanding, not understanding.
I think that the way you've delivered a lot of what you've said today proves your point. You're very good at teaching things. Absolutely, I can see that. So I think for your students, they're lucky to have you, mate. Absolutely.
I'm lucky to have them, because I said they don't know what they don't know, and they will always question me in such a way that it makes me go like, well, what if it was possible that way? How can we make that happen? Right?
That's a good attitude. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the new design, right? That's where new design comes from, because someone just wasn't happy with what they understood the way it was given to them.
A weird story just popped into my head when I worked for a building company for about 2 years after I finished high school. And at one job we went to, a guy was building a house. It was a 3-story house. had all these weird window sizes, weirdest ones I've ever seen in my life. Some of the windows were like maybe about, I think they were about 14, 15 feet high. And it was kind of a normal house, but it just had these weird room sizes and window sizes. And I thought, why do people not do this more often? We follow these norms all the time where we kind of copy. How do they do it? Oh, okay, that's the right size. Okay, let's do it that way. I discovered it was cost, but I love the fact that these people had gone and done something completely different. And it always stuck with me. And the guy said to me at the time, function follows form, or form, that whole phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, oh, that's fascinating. And I'm not a designer, but it always stuck with me, this house that this guy was building. I loved it. It was just the most cool house I've ever seen.
Well, creativity and being resourceful go hand in hand. When my dad, he built our house, because he was a construction worker. And in our hallway, there was these 2 by 6 inch by 6 inch parquet tiles. But they were originally 1 foot by 1 foot, but they were a bunch of damaged tiles that he had bought. And he says, well, these were all broken, but if I cut them by 6 inches by 6 inches, I've got plenty of tiles at a quarter of the price, and I can put all of these down the hallway, right? So it's using those materials as effectively as possible where you come up. And if you look at it, it was a beautiful floor, and you would never know that those were supposed to be one.
Yeah.
But yeah, 1 foot tiles. And we see that. We see that in innovation. We see that when we look at the stuff that we personally like to do. Here the conversation comes full circle. I connect personal history with professional philosophy, how my values have shaped not only the work that I do, but how I mentor the next generation to carry it forward. It's less about designing objects and more about designing conditions, environments where students can build confidence, curiosity, and clarity. This isn't the end of the conversation. It's an opening for a longer one about the role of educators as a catalyst and the ripple effect of making space for others. When I've had so many jobs, like there's no such thing as work that I am ashamed of. Because any job I've done like 100% honestly, so I've worked at Starbucks when I needed, Starbucks money and insurance. I've worked as a construction laborer. I've been a teacher. I've been a designer and an engineer. I've worked as a painter, and all of those things, put you on that type of path. Currently, I'm working with a regenerative farm 2 days a week over the summer, while I'm off classes right now, in creating helping them with their regenerative path and their agricultural needs. And it is allowing me a moment, one, to reconnect to things that I love. Like I love plants. I absolutely adore following people that are creating seeds and like food production type stuff. I think that's wonderful. And then helping to rebuild and redesign all of this like soil that needs regeneration is really interesting to me. What it allows me to do is to then look at this from a perspective, not only like where does my food come from? Why does my food come from there? How do I make it better? And then how do I make all of my discoveries more accessible to people in this community? Because it's an underserved community. Farmers got time to farm. They don't got time to figure things out. And anyone that can help them get there faster, cleaner, and more effective is definitely something that needs to be there. But that's the designer, right? That is the designer way. You lose yourself in the process. You make discoveries along the way, and then you teach once you get there.
Speaking of farmers, I've got to tell you the story that I've been actually just made a video on today. It's about farmers. They've tested the soil underneath solar panels, and they find that often the crops and grass grow better underneath solar panels. Some people critique these solar farms on farming land, but actually it improves yield rather than the opposite.
Well, because it's funny, you say most people live on the Sun Belt, and the Sun Belt is incredibly harsh environment for things to be growing on. If you even look at, let's say, blueberries grown in Peru versus blueberries grown in the United States, due to the higher altitude and their access to those type of light rays, the levels of antioxidants in them is significantly higher than those grown at its native level. So that's the plant responding, in a different way. I have a greenhouse and stuff. The lettuce I grow in shaded areas. It tastes better and it thrives better. Right? Yeah. Things were meant to grow in different shaded environments and mid-level food forests. There's a lot of different stuff. So that is awesome. That is absolutely awesome that they're finding that.
Just sort of add that random information at the end. Mate,
no, Anthony, I love it.
Really good to meet you. Hopefully one day we can catch up in the US or in Australia. If you're here, come say hi.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Now
Yes.
I do have to tell you, if you make it to Rockhampton, Australia, there's an outdoor audio system by the water. That's one of the designs I worked on. If you actually want to see some of the stuff, that's part of my smart city stuff that I've worked on. So I've
An
made it some things
outdoor
that made
audio
it down to
system
you.
by the
Yeah,
water.
yeah, by the
Sounds
water
great.
with all the little blue lights on it. Yeah,
Cool. Did you come
cool.
to Australia?
No, I never get to see where my stuff goes. They would lock me up and make me work in a room now.
You designed it and then they thought, there, yeah,
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 they
yeah.
install it. Yeah.
There is a lot of amazing stuff that comes out of the United States.
In the final minutes, what lingers isn't complexity of topics, but the clarity of purpose. Sam and I bring all back to the core of how design, dialogue, and discipline creates momentum, not just for products, but for people. There's no mic drop here, no final pinch, just shared recognition that the work continues and that it matters. Because the best conversations don't end, they resonate.
I've said this often, I think you guys have more of an entrepreneur culture than anywhere else in the world. I think that's what drives the fact that America has more successful companies than any other country. You a lot of the time, I think, for example, especially in places like California and other emerging sort of Silicon Valley type areas, when people say, what do? The ideal job is not to say, I'm a lawyer or a doctor. It's to say, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm creating this technology. I'm creating this business. That's one of the things that I really love about the US. That culture.
I think the immigrant story really plays into that, because you have to think it took a person who was willing to leave their country and their comfort zone to come across and do something different.
Yeah.
And that type of personality generates its own momentum. And I agree with you, that is woven within the culture of the United States in a positive way. So I'm going to do a little outro if that's okay with you. Thanks, man. That's it for today's episode of Design Impact. Huge thanks to Sam Evans, the Electric Viking, for sharing his story, his insights, and his energy. If you want to go deeper into any of these topics we've touched on, I've linked to one of Sam's video for each of the questions we've discussed. You'll find them in the show notes or on our website. It's a rare chance to see how ideas evolve, not just into conversation, but over time. As always, thank you for listening. If you found value in today's episode, share this with somebody who's passionate about design, sustainability, or just thinking for themselves. Until next time, I'm Professor Anthony Reale. That's Sam Evans, the Electric Viking. Keep asking better questions, keep designing with impact, and keep thinking forward. Sam,
Thanks,
thank
mate.
you so much. Oh man, thank you.
See you, buddy. Bye.
For those of you that made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more so it shows up on your feed. I'm going to keep making this stuff so I can assign it for homework, so don't worry about that part. Just so you know, just to do the narration portions, it took me over 125 takes because reading words is hard.